Hello, my name is Frank McCrae. I'm the founder and president of Procom. From time to time, people will ask me for the Procom story, which is how I started as a consulting company of one person, myself, and have grown it to its current size. We now have offices across North America, gross revenues about $1.2 billion, and about 10,000 people work through our company each year. My background is IT. I graduated from Western University in 1969. I believe it was the first graduating class in computer science for Western. My early work experiences was on a full-time basis with companies, a number of companies. I'd work for a company for 2 years, learn what had to be learned, and then I'd be headhunted by a company and to move into another employment. I did this 5 times. Interestingly enough, of all the companies that I worked for, none of them exist. They were victims of mergers, acquisitions, or insolvencies in some cases. Around 1978, I accepted a contract with the Ontario government where I was to work for the next 3 years. One day my wife approached me and suggested that she wanted to go on vacation and she wanted to go with a man, and she was hoping that man would be me. I took the hint and booked 9 weeks of vacation with my client, and we headed off to Hong Kong with one-way tickets. We then traveled through Southeast Asia. I returned 9 weeks later, leaving my wife in Tahiti. She had an extra 2 weeks, and so she was going to stay on. When I returned home to Toronto, I found a mess of bills inside her front door. I recognized the fact that my credit cards were tapped out. I also found a note from my employer, the agency I was working through, and asking me to drop by their office the Monday morning. When I did so, they presented me with an option. They said we had good news and we had not so good news. The good news was that they'd accepted my request to increase my rate, or change my rate from one of salary to one of commission based upon the rate. I was going to get 80% of the rate. I was very, very happy. The bad news was that my contract had been terminated and I was functionally unemployed. Finding yourself unemployed, being broke, with credit cards up to the max, is not a very pleasant experience. I went to the government office to collect my personal belongings. When I arrived, I met my director, who said he was pleased to see me back and told me that the termination was a tactical one. He had to cut somebody, and I was the absent candidate. However, now that I was back, he would be pleased to run an RFP and hopefully get me as a successful candidate back. I appreciated the offer, but I know that in the government that would take 4 to 6 weeks, and I had a few challenges. I had a wife who was in Tahiti who wanted to return to Toronto, hopefully. They said I had credit cards to pay off, I had debts to pay, and I needed the cash. Waiting 4 weeks was not something I was in a position to do. I headed home by TTC. As I left the Eglinton station and boarded the bus, I bumped into a manager that I used to work with at Canada Permanent Trust some years earlier. His comment to me was I looked like a truck had driven over me, and so I explained the situation, and I was quite surprised that he was very upbeat in his response. And he asked me, when you worked at Canada Permanent, did you not support the stock transfer system? And I said I did. He said, did you not work with the mortgage system? And I said, well, yes, I did. And he said, would you be prepared to develop an interface between those systems and the Canadian Depository Securities? Is this something that you could do? And I said, sure, I could do that. He then said, well, would you be prepared to do it on a fixed price basis? And I said, I've never worked fixed price before. I've always worked as been an employee. And he said, well, I'm going to offer you $30,000, which is more than you were making on salary for a year's work. Can you do this work within 6 months? And I said, absolutely, not a problem. So by the time we got off the bus on Mount Pleasant, I had accepted a contract and I was employed. I'd only been unemployed for a period of 24 hours or less. My first client was Canada Permanent Trust. On my first day, I was invited to a meeting with the Vice President of Finance. When I walked into the meeting room, I looked across and I saw that the Vice President of Finance was actually the chap who'd been a clerk sitting beside me during the 3 years that I'd worked at Canada Permanent Trust. He put his fingers to his lips and asked me to be quiet, and I took a seat. the company that had the systems integration contract with Canada Permanent came in, and they were told of Canada Permanent's decision to engage me to do the interface to CDS. I heard complaints, problems, and predictions of jeopardy to the project. However, the meeting ended, they left, and I then had an opportunity to say hello to my former workmates. 3 days later, I completed the development. Testing followed, and they got sign-off. Approximately 3 weeks into the project, I went to my project manager and presented the finished product and asked for my $30,000. To put it politely, he was pissed. His comment was that the systems integrator had quoted a price of $300,000. I'd done it, quoted a price for $30,000. If I did it in 3 weeks, he would look like an idiot. He said it's completely unacceptable. I reiterated my situation that I needed cash because my wife was away, etc., etc. And so we came to an agreement where he engaged me on a contract basis. I started working at $240 a day as a contract programmer on the project. He also undertook generously to pay me within the 2 weeks. I had cash, I had employment, I was a very happy person. I worked at Canada Permanent over the next 3 years, during which time I brought in approximately 10 or 12 people on contract to work on the project. When the project ended 3 years later, I was the last person on the team. I went out to lunch with the Vice President of Finance again and the project manager, at the end of which they pulled a check, an envelope out of their pocket and presented it to me. It was the check for $30,000. I had forgotten to bill them and collect that money. They said it was due. They gave me the money. It was current. And so Procom had its financing.